Welcome to part 3 of the Vale, the rise of House Arryn. In part 2, I talked about how the Andals had first set out to land and conquer the Vale. Some petty First Men kings sought to use the Andals to destroy their enemies, but in turn were destroyed themselves. However, one man, King Rhoybar Royce II, had followed in his grandfather's stance that the Andals couldn't be treated with, but destroyed. 2 weeks before his 16th birthday, Rhoybar became king of Runestone and decided it was time to gather the remaining First Men petty kings and unite them against the Andals, who had begun to squabble among themselves for resources and land, and really weren't treating the First Men as a threat anymore. For a while, Rhoybar had succeeded, until one Andal night, Artys Arryn noticed what was going on and decided to unite the Andal kings and lords to destroy the king and his hosts. The same age as King Rhoybar, Artys Arryn was a resourceful and cunning man, considered one of the finest warriors, and to excel above all else in sword, lance, and Morningstar. More importantly, everyone just loved this guy. So despite not being an Andal king or even an Andal lord, he brought the surrounding Andals together. Interestingly, Sir Artys had actually been born in the Vale at the shadow of the Giant's Lance. The Giant's Lance is the tallest peak of the Mountains of the Moon and has falcons that soar around its peak. So in honor of this, Artys had taken a moon and falcon on his shield. On his war helmet was a pair of falcon wings, so he had a whole theme going on. Because of this theme, Artys became known as the Falcon Knight. The two equal forces, the First Men defending their homes and the Andals that wanted to keep their newly acquired homes, faced off at the foot of the Giant's Lance, close to Artys's own home. King Rhoybar Royce had the advantage though. He had the high ground and the mountain at his rear. Not only that, but he had arrived days earlier to dig trenches in front of their army, to put sharpened stakes smeared with offal and excrement to offset the Andals' advantage of having 10-to-1 mounted knights and much better armor and weapons. Finally, 3 days later, the Andals arrived at dusk and set up camp 1.5 miles from the First Men army. As the sun set and the clouds covered the stars, hundreds of campfires glowed in the night. But Rhoybar looked to the enemy's camp and saw the Andal warrior with his silver helm with falcon wings and knew who he had to go after. At dawn, the armies would clash. After a restless night and an arrow or two blindly shot in the night at each army, morning came and the men put on their armor and prepared for an intense battle to start. As dawn came, a sign appeared in the sky, at least to the Andals. There were 7 stars shining, which meant their gods were with them. They sounded the trumpets and the vanguard charged up the slope towards the First Men forces. 7 times the Andals charged at the First Men, and 6 times the First Men shrugged off their attacks. The 7th time the Andals had an advantage, what appeared to be a madman. Targold the Toilet was a huge man, always going into battle naked from the waist up, covered in a bloody 7-pointed star with an axe in each hand. They called him Torgold the Grim because the man always charged into battle just laughing his ass off. According to legend and song, Torgold felt no pain, and if lore is right, and not exaggerated as it often is, he broke through the First Men army with a ton of bleeding wounds, but not really seeming to care at all. The guy was absolutely massacring Lord Redfort's warriors. When Torgold got to Lord Redfort himself, he took off the man's arm at the shoulder in a single cut. When the sorceress Ursula Upcliff, who had joined King Rhoybar Royce II, appeared on her blood-red horse to curse the huge man, he instantly leapt on the woman, grasped her face with his bare bloody hands, and tore her head from her shoulders as she screamed for mercy. Now, you can decide for yourself whether you think she was just a bad sorceress, or if Torgold just was that epic of a guy. But Torgold had made a gap in the army of the First Men, and the Andals seized it. However, King Rhoybar wasn't finished yet, and gathered his men to rush against the forces, swinging his Valyrian steel sword he had acquired at the fingers Lady Forlorn, killing any that got in his way. He rode up to Torgold and swung the sword at the giant's head, but Torgold, hopped up on a lot of adrenaline, sought to catch the blade in his bare hands. The sword cut his hands clean off and buried itself in the giant's skull. Torgold died as he had lived, laughing like a madman, except this time he was choking on his own blood. Rhoybar then turned his attention to Artys Arryn. Bronze armor met silvered Andal warrior, and they clashed. However, a Valyrian steel sword, even a stolen one, is a huge advantage, and he quickly killed Artys. Or so he thought. Rhoybar had in fact killed a fake Artys Arryn, and now 500 Andal knights were coming down the Giant's Lance to attack the First Men's rear. Turns out fighting in the area Artys had been born and raised wasn't the brightest brightest idea. Artys had remembered the goat paths and secretly led his army to surprise the first men while they were distracted by the front forces. Of course, leading the attack now was the real Falcon Knight. Pinched in the front and back, the first men had no chance. All 30 first men lords, many of whom had given up their crowns to serve under Roybar, died. It isn't clear who killed Roybar in the end. What is known is that House Corbray reclaimed their sword, Lady Forlorn, from him. So perhaps it was a Corbray that did it. It doesn't matter because in the end, the first men were all but done. 14 noble old first men houses were ended that day, and the ones that remained were allowed to at great cost. They lost gold and land, they had hostages taken from them, and they were forced to swear loyalty to Artys Arryn, first of his name, now king of the mountain and vale. It would take centuries for these houses to regain any pride or power. The 5 first men houses we know survived the battle were the Royces, Belmores, Coldwaters, Hunters, Redforts, though the Royces would never be kings again. Under King Arryn, the Vale became known as the Vale of Arryn. And if the Vale thought it had an Andal problem before, this victory just meant more Andals poured into the land. These Andals needed land, and the easiest way was to take from the remaining first men. These first men had 3 choices: resist and be crushed, become slaves, or marry into Andal families that came over. However, there was a 4th option chosen by some first men: flee to the Mountains of the Moon. I talked in part 1 how the Mountains of the Moon are incredibly important to the Vale and its defenses. The mountains have snow-capped gray-green peaks, are vast, mostly impassable, bleak, and not great for living. Those that do live in the mountains live short, savage lives. To the west, these mountains border the Riverlands, creating a nice buffer. They hit the Bight in the north, the Bay of Crabs in the south, and surround the Vale proper. Many dangers are in these mountains, including rock slides, aspens, shadow cats, and more. Those that occupied the mountains after they refused to submit to the Andals and fled were called wildlings, mountain men, hill tribes, or mountain clans. It should be noted that one of their nicknames, wildlings, has no relation to the free folk that live beyond the wall. The mountain clans considered the others of the Vale to be lowlanders, and anyone that dared to go into these mountains without great support often were preyed on and killed by these men. The best known clans of the mountain men are the Stone Crows, Milk Snakes, Sons of the Mist, Moon Brothers, Black Ears, who take the ears of men they defeat, Sons of the Tree, Burn Men, who burned a part of their body to prove they were man enough, though they may have started that after the Dance of the Dragons when they worshipped a fire witch that had a dragon and demanded gifts and burnings. There was also the Howlers, the Redsmiths, and the Painted Dogs. The lesser ones usually didn't last long enough to be written down, either by being destroyed by rival clans or the Knights of the Vale. However, there is a path that leads from the Riverlands to the Vale, the High Road. This road allowed enemies to enter from other parts of Westeros. While the first men had created the original Bloody Gate, it was only a rough-hewn, unmortared wall built like the typical ring forts of the first men. This wall wasn't super impressive, but it was good enough to hold out against dozens of armies that smashed themselves bloody against it, trying to invade the Vale. This includes the one-time king of the Isles and Rivers, Halleck Hor. He tried 3 times to breach the gate and failed each time, so not too shabby of an original gate. King Osric Arryn V decided during his rule this was the time to strengthen the Bloody Gate, so he sent people to work on it. Soon though, the Vale wasn't enough for the Andals, and they began to spill out of the Bloody Gate to conquer the rest of Westeros. While the kings of the Vale tried to increase their territory at times, they always had the mountains to go back to for protection. Now, besides reinforcing the Bloody Gate, the Andals understood that just as they had been attacked from the sea, so could others attack them from the sea. So they constructed strong castles and forts on their coastlines, and covered the fingers and watchtowers with beacons that could warn of any danger from the sea. In Gulltown, which had become a city with a strong harbor, the Vale and the Arryn kings were supplied in trade in Gulltown, which had become a city with a strong harbor. House Arryn was also smart enough to construct warships to protect this important trade hub. Now, other islands around the Vale were eventually taken in by future Arryn kings. The Pepple, a cute little island in the Bight north of the Fingers, was taken by King Hugh Arryn the Fat. The Paps, an island that sits northeast of the Fingers in the Narrow Sea, was brought into the Vale Kingdom by King Hugh Arryn's grandson, King Hugo Arryn the Hopeful. Which isle was brought under Arryn control through marriage instead of fighting by King Alistair Arryn II, who wed Arwen Upcliff. Now we come to the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters consisted of 3 islands that sit in the Bight. These islands are known as Sweet Sister, Long Sister, and Little Sister. They are known for debauchery and having a long history of violence. kings. Their lords and kings were savage rulers, and Arryn kings had to take care of them. Except for a long time, the Arryn kings actually didn't, and they allowed the cruel kings, pirates, and raiders to exist. This all changed when the three sisters gave the Starks a little bit too much grief, and the North decided, you know, if we conquer the three sisters, not only can we stop the raiding and slave trade, but we would have control of a trade area, and it would be a buffer between us and the Vale. This would lead to the Starks and the North attacking the three sisters, and then the Arryns and the Vale getting involved to defend the three sisters. So in part 4 of the Vale series, I'll talk about this horrible war, and in part 5, we'll talk about the downfall of the Arryn kings to lords and their time afterwards.